you. Okay, amazing. So, if you could just introduce yourself really quickly and, describe your HRET work. The floor is
Yeah,
yours.
absolutely. So I'm Jess Terbrueggen, and I am on the steering committee with HRE, and I also do work on the podcast and work on the priorities committee, and have done some work with respect to the Edmonds Fellowship Program, and also kind of supported some of the fundraising efforts for HRE USA. And in my day job, I also work with out of school doing international baccalaureate curriculum in literature, and do some work with NCTE on the side as well.
That's amazing. You do so much. So what is one aspect of your human rights education work that you are especially proud of?
Yeah, I think I feel like all of my roles and all of my interactions with human rights education work are really just supportive. They're just really supportive roles. I don't see myself central to really any of it, but it's supporting the fundraising efforts that are going to help programs and policies and curriculum reach people that need it, or it's working on getting a podcast pushed out and doing the promo materials for it that will again kind of help push out material to the public. And so I guess a lot of it is supportive in getting content and materials and ideas out to the general public so that they can learn more about it and they can really understand why human rights education is so significant and important. And the big push with that is, of course, there's human rights, but then, the emphasis is on the human rights education. And so how do you really make sure, as somebody who's working in education, and then, thinking about how we're kind of pushing human rights education out into those education spheres, whether it's kind of a traditional classroom or whether it's non-traditional spaces, but a lot of times it's left out of the kind of fabric of what's going on in education spaces. And so I see that on all sides. I see where it's not there, but then also see all these kind of supportive, wonderful volunteers, myself, but all of my wonderful colleagues who work tirelessly to try and get that information out and get it into spaces so that teachers have it, students have it. So I suppose I'm just generally proud of being part of the whole kind of network of people that are working, giving of their, in-kind hours to just try and make sure that other people have access to that information and that it can become something that's more normalized in everyday education spaces.
Oh, that's really inspiring to hear. And this kind of ties into the next question of why do you think that human rights education and training is important?
Yeah, I think it's really important because you've got a diversity of people. I mean, I have worked in educational settings across the globe, but then most recently, obviously, I'm back in the States in Washington, D.C. And whether I've been overseas in, international institutions there in those contexts, or here in the US, the the world is just becoming, it always has been diverse. I don't want to say it's becoming more diverse. It's always been diverse, but it's the idea of like what's kind of normative with that diversity is changing, and people are accepting of so much more diversity and the inclusion of so many different, people in that framework. And um, these movements are really highlighting the importance of human rights because we need to all recognize how to kind of filter what we viewed as normative frames in the past to be kind of, it's this way or it's that way, and constantly be pushing ourselves to think about how we approach education. And especially if I look at this through the lens of, being a classroom educator, the way you select and I'm going to talk about it from a literature standpoint because that's what I do, but the way you select text and the way you frame that and the way you frame the narratives and the stories of the people inside of that, and the way you think about the different students that are sitting in your classroom and their positionalities and where they're coming from, and how everyone is bringing to the table some very unique cultural perspectives that a lot of times education in the past had been very singularly framed through one lens, right? And even if you look at the history of international education as it kind of originated as schools for kind of European and American businessmen and women overseas, but then that's really changed over time in the last few decades. And now those schools are very representative of those kind of host nations where those schools are at. And there's a lot of diversity in them and people coming from all different backgrounds. And there used to be this emphasis on kind of teaching this very, kind of Western centric kind of type of curriculum. But now there's a lot of awareness around moving away from that and moving into thinking about how can I frame this so that people that were at once on the kind of edges of being in these stories, they're actually centered in the stories, and their past is centered in the stories, and their histories are centered in those stories. And that has such a big impact, really. So I think human rights, I'm always kind of looking at it through the intersection of narrative and stories and literature and history, because I come from a humanities background, and how that dictates the way we all behave. And so those stories are super important, and looking at it through a human rights lens and making sure, even just making a couple thoughtful adjustments when you're planning, those type of lessons, it really can bring a completely different experience for the diverse students that you might have in front of you, so that they don't feel kind of marginalized in the fringes of what's going on.
Wow. Thank you for your answer. We're so lucky to have educators like you in our world today. So this takes me to my next question, just asking how your connection to HRE USA has made a difference to you and how it's impacted your HRE work.
Yeah, when I found HRE USA, I just come back to the US after being abroad for over a decade. And I, was working with another one of my lovely colleagues at HRE USA, Alana Haviv, and I had kind of met her through some of my work with a professor at TC Columbia. And then I went to a conference with her and I met Christy, and it kind of just all snowballed. One thing led to another. And since I've been a part of the organization, which has been going on, oh my gosh, two-ish years now, I guess. But I have learned so much, So not only have I brought, my support and efforts and in-kind hours to the organization, but I've learned so much from working with other colleagues who have been in these spaces even longer than I have been, and they have, worked in really different capacities, which is fun to have this organization that's very grassroots and pulls from, there's people that have spent their careers in law, people that have spent their careers in education, people that have spent their careers in the nonprofit sector, and all of those people come together on a pretty regular basis, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, to get together with this central focus of human rights education. And what does that mean with regards to policy? What does that mean with regards to actual just curriculum in a classroom? So I have found it to be a continuation of my own education. And as much as I can support, I feel like I learn and gain from it as well. Like when we were talking a minute ago before we started the recording about, if I could be a lifelong student, I would. Well, being involved with organizations like HRE USA is kind of a continuation of that learning process. So I'm always, learning something new from a colleague, or even in the fundraising area, this is, learning different ways that you can kind of get people to pay attention and have more awareness about human rights education and how you can get them to kind of be supportive of those movements. So it's really a great community and a learning experience all wrapped into one.
What a beautiful answer. And I will just say that your contributions to HRE USA have been so profound. And I've only been with the organization for a summer, but it's literally been such an honor knowing you and working with you. And thank you for all your answers. I'm going to